fellow followers of Jesus, grace to you and peace from God our Father and from our Lord Jesus Christ. Amen. Well, it's been a quiet week in Red Rock City, my hometown, out there on the edge of the Iron Range. It snowed almost a foot, but it's been cold, bitter cold, so that even the snowmobilers were staying inside. And it was so windy some of those days you couldn't even see the road. The groundhog, he saw his shadow last week. I guess that means spring is coming. No, he didn't see his shadow last week. So that means spring is coming soon. But you sure couldn't tell it by looking out your window or at your thermometer. The blizzard was especially treacherous down in the cities, freezing rain first and then several inches of blowing snow. There were hundreds of accidents during the storm. And after they got it all plowed, there were hundreds more accidents because of the ice underneath. Paula was one of those accidents. She hit a patch of ice coming into a turn, clipped a mailbox that set her brand new Mustang spinning until she hit the ditch and the car started to roll. She was thrown out of the Mustang, but somehow she made a soft landing into a snowbank. Her car quit rolling and lay upside down just a few feet away from her, the headlights shining in her face. And dazed and lying there in the glare of the headlight, she wasn't sure if she was alive or not. She had heard you're supposed to go towards the light, so she tried to, but she was stuck. She couldn't move. And she thought about her kids, her husband, her life, work and shopping and all the things that seemed so important 5 minutes ago were now so unimportant. God, what a waste. I gave my life to all the wrong things. And all of a sudden she felt hands brushing the snow off of her, digging her out. She couldn't see who it was in the glare, but he said, "You're lucky I was driving by, ma'am. I usually don't go this way. God must have been watching over you." And he brushed the snow away from Paula's eyes, and for the first time she could kind of see him. Well, she couldn't really see him, just sort of his outline in all the glare, but she could read his name tag. John Ananias, Damascus Road Towing. He called 911 and covered her with a blanket until the paramedics arrived. The rest was kind of foggy for her, the ambulance ride, emergency room. But for some bruises, they gave her a clean bill of health. The nurse said, "God must have something planned for you, honey, because nobody walks away from an accident like that. Promise me you'll wear your seatbelt from now on." "I promise," Paula muttered. She was pretty stiff and sore, even with a clean bill of health, and so she stayed home from work the rest of the week. But that didn't stop her from thinking. She couldn't stop thinking. Every morning she hugged her kids like she'd never see them again, and every night she asked her husband, "What's next? Is this all there is? I don't want to come to the end of my life again and have it feel that empty again." That was the worst feeling in the world. On Friday, she called up Pastor Isaacson over at Red Rock Lutheran, told him about the accident. "I'm okay," she said, but I've been thinking. I think I will serve on the council if you still want me." Stewardship, was it? Pastor Isaacson almost wet his pants. It's almost impossible to find a stewardship person for council. But he tried to play it cool. "Yes, Paula, I think the stewardship position is still available. We'd love to have you on the ballot." He did not mention that there were never two names on the ballot. "Thanks, but why the change of mind?" "It's a change of heart, actually," Paula said. "The accident, it got me to thinking. I realized I've been giving my life to the wrong things. I've been a bad steward. Maybe now I can start to give my life to something worthwhile." "Paula, that's the best definition of stewardship I've heard in a long time," Pastor Isaacson said. "Thank you. And I can't wait to see where God leads you and where you lead Red Lock Lutheran. But on a more mundane subject, can I ask a favor of you, Paula? Sure, she said. Would you be willing to help with communion this Sunday? Council members usually do it, but the person we had scheduled had to bail. I'd be honored, Paula said. So this morning, Paula, still a little stiff and bruised, served communion for the first time in her life. She trembled as she took the wine from Pastor Isaacson. But then, when she handed the first person a cup and said, "The blood of Christ shed for you," she felt a rush of joy come over her. This is important, she thought. And she smiled a big smile at each worshiper who came forward, and it made everybody kind of nervous to see her smiling like that, because Lutherans, well, they usually don't smile at communion. Huh? Next to her, Pete gave out the bread. Pete's the outgoing evangelism chair. He served his 2 terms and is looking forward to a year off of council, kind of. It all started 6 years ago when he invited Pastor Isaacson out to his fishing shack, mostly to introduce himself and explain why he doesn't come to church too much. I mean, even a preacher can't give you a hard time when you're fishing in his house, when he's fishing in your house. Pastor Isaacson came to Pete's wearing dress pants and patent leather shoes and a black overcoat. "You ever fished before, Pastor?" Pete asked. "Oh, sure. We used to do it all the time when I was younger." "Okay," Pete said. And he dug out a pair of snowmobile boots and some fishing gear for him. Turned out he not only didn't have any equipment, he didn't have a license. So Pete offered him a beer while Pete fished. And they talked about a lot of things out there in the fish house, like men do, never really looking at each other, just looking at the hole in the ice. Family, football, jobs, high school. Never really got around to talking about God, never had a nibble either. And then Pastor Isaacson said, "Well, why don't you try the other hole?" Well, that was about the stupidest thing Pete had ever heard. Why would a hole 3 feet away make any difference at all? "Okay, preacher, if you say so, I'll try the other hole." Pete cleaned out the ice chunks and dropped the bait into the hole, and before it had sunk a foot, there was a whoosh, and a fish jumped out of the hole onto the wood floor. It was a walleye. It had to be 4 or 5 pounds. It barely fit through the hole. "Did you see that?" Pete hollered. "I've never seen anything like that before." He dropped the line in again. Same thing. Whoosh! Another walleye on the floor. He did it again and again until he had his limit of 6 walleyes, 1 big one, 24 inches, and 5 that measured exactly 19 3/4 inches. Pastor Isaacson took a sip of his beer and thought, "So this is what ice fishing is like. No wonder people like it. I ought to get a license." Pete looked at the hole and at Pastor Isaacson, and Pete fell on his knees. He actually fell on his knees, and he said, "I don't deserve to have you here. I was going to tell you something, but now I'm not so sure." "What are you talking about?" Pastor Isaacson said. "The fish. I love catching fish. I'm good at it, but this, nobody can do this. It can't happen." "Really?" Pastor Isaacson said. "You know how Jesus talked about fishing for people? Maybe he's talking to you." "Yeah," Pete said. "He's got to be talking to me. I've never fished for people before, but maybe I can learn." And so Pete learned. He began to serve on the evangelism team because that sounded most like fishing to him. And you need to understand that evangelism in Red Rock City is not like evangelism in a place like Alabama or Georgia. In Alabama and Georgia, they go door to door every weekend. The most effective evangelism program in Red Rock City has always been having babies. That's how they've done it since their ancestors came over on the boat, and it worked pretty well until the last 50 years or so. And now they were pretty much at a loss as to what to do. And so Pete took it as a challenge. It's just like fishing, he said. You got to go find them and bring them in. And so Pete did. He organized an annual Red Rock Lutheran ice fishing tournament. He started a Hair of the Dog Bible study on Saturday mornings at Red Rock Saloon. And he taught others to do all sorts of things like that. And now Red Rock Lutheran is full of people who never thought they'd ever darken the doors of a church. And Pete, he learned that he loves to see people's lives change. And he even wrote a song about it, ripped off a song actually. I've Got a Rock and Roll Heart by Eric Clapton. He changed the words. Okay, I'm going to try and sing this, watch out, okay? I get off on people meeting Jesus. I get off on lives that are changed. Like the way he meets them, just like he met me. I've got a fisherman's heart. Okay, sorry. It's the worst song Pastor Isaacson has ever heard. But Pete gets up and he sings it, and the whole place starts rocking, partly because it's fun, partly because it's Pete singing it. I mean, who would have guessed that this stubbly, bearded, crusty man could change into an evangelist? It almost makes you believe in God. And that's the thought that took Pastor Isaacson by surprise. Standing there, watching Pete and Paula, two of the most unlikely people, distribute communion. And it was more than he could handle. He turned and started moving the communion ware around the altar, but mostly he was just hiding his eyes. I know people, he thought, and I'm pretty good with people. And this just does not happen with ambitious, young, upwardly mobile people who drive Mustangs and stubbly, bearded people who like to fish on Sunday mornings. And suddenly he saw right there in Red Rock Lutheran, Pastor Isaacson saw who they were dealing with here. He saw the bread and the wine sitting on the altar. And the whole altar was just a stitch in the hem of the Lord's robe. He heard the music playing, the people singing Fisherman's Heart, and behind it he heard a choir of all the saints and angels joining in, so it made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. And he heard the words, the body of Christ given for you, the blood of Christ shed for you, and suddenly realized what that meant. And they began to glow red like fire on the altar. And Paula and Pete came over and picked up those flaming coals and held them up to his face, and he didn't want to take it. It would burn him up, but too late, and they touched his lips. And instead of burn, he felt cool forgiveness wash over him. And he heard the voice of the Lord say, "Whom shall I send? Who will go for me?" And he heard himself say, "Here I am, Lord, send me." That's the news from Red Rock City, where the Roman Catholics are strong, the Methodists are good-looking, and the Baptists are above.